My kinsman and I were on our way back to Calcutta after a long journey across the country. We found ourselves stranded at a railway junction, forced to wait in the stifling heat of the waiting room for a delayed train. It was there we met a man who would leave a lasting impression on my mind. He was a Muslim gentleman, dressed impeccably, with eyes that seemed to hold a quiet, cynical amusement about the world. At first, we didn't know what to make of him. When he spoke, it was with the authority of someone who had lived 100 lives. If the conversation turned to the ancient history of the Mughals, he spoke as if he had dined with emperors. If my kinsman, who was deeply interested in science and the theosophical movement, brought up the mysteries of the universe, the stranger would smile a tired smile and offer insights that left us both entirely speechless. As the night stretched on and the station grew terrifyingly quiet, the conversation drifted, as it often does in the dark, toward the supernatural. My kinsman, a man of logic and strict reason, scoffed at the idea of ghosts. He argued passionately that the unseen world was merely a misinterpretation of the seen. The stranger listened quietly, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. He struck a match, the sudden flare illuminating his sharp features, and exhaled a long cloud of smoke. "I used to believe exactly as you do," he said softly, his voice barely rising above the distant hum of the sleeping station. "I was a man of science, a man of modern thought, but that was before I was sent to Barich." He leaned forward, the cynicism dropping from his eyes, replaced by a shadow of something else. Something like fear. And in the dead of the night, waiting for a train that seemed like it would never arrive, he told us his story. "I was a young man," he began. "I had just secured a government post as a toll collector for the local cotton trade. It was a tedious job in a tedious place, but it came with one extraordinary perk. The government had quartered me in magnificent structure. It was a massive, sprawling palace built of pristine white marble. It stood alone on the banks of the Swasta River, completely isolated from the nearest town. It was built some 250 years ago by Emperor Mahmud Shah II as a pleasure palace. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, but it was entirely, desperately empty. My head clerk, an old man named Karim Baksh, warned me on my very first day. He begged me not to live there. He told me the locals wouldn't go near the place, not even in broad daylight. Even the most desperate thieves stayed clear of the grounds. "The stones are hungry, Sahib," the old man had whispered to me, his eyes wide with genuine terror. The palace was built for the emperor's pleasures, but it became a prison for countless women. Their unfulfilled desires, their stifled tears, their jealousies, and their broken hearts seeped into the very marble. The building is cursed by the passions of the dead. It is starving for a living. I was a modern, educated man. I laughed in his face. I told him I was looking forward to the peace and quiet. And for the first few days, it was exactly that. The palace was a maze of echoing, cavernous halls. The marble floors were cold and smooth, and the arched windows looked out over the quiet, dark waters of the river. But the solitude was profound. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. The strangeness did not announce itself with a sudden fright. It steeped in, slowly, like water through a cracked foundation. It began in the height of the summer. The heat was unbearable. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered out of the grand bedroom and went down to the river. A long, magnificent flight of white marble steps led directly from the palace down into the water. I sat on the bottom step, the water lapping gently at my feet, trying to catch whatever faint breeze might roll off the river. The water was perfectly still. It was like a sheet of black glass under the moonlight. Suddenly, the silence was broken. I heard the distinct sound of splashing, not the sudden slap of a fish jumping, but the rhythmic, playful sound of water being kicked and tossed. It was the sound of people, women, bathing. I sat up, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared out into the dark river, but there was nothing. The surface was unbroken, yet the sound grew louder. I could hear the faint, echoing sound of laughter. I could hear water dripping from unseen skin, the gentle wringing of wet hair. A rational man would have convinced himself it was a trick of the acoustics, an echo from a village miles away. And I tried. The Lord knows I tried. But then, as I stood up to retreat into the palace, I heard the footsteps. They were bare feet, wet from the river, stepping lightly onto the marble stairs right beside me. Step by step, they ascended. I couldn't see a soul, but the air around me suddenly shifted. The stagnant heat of the summer night vanished, replaced by a sudden, overpowering scent. It was heavy, intoxicating, the smell of crushed roses, ancient musk, and a deeply exotic attar that I had never encountered in my life. I stood paralyzed on the steps as the invisible procession moved past me, their unseen, wet garments brushing the air, trailing the scent of a forgotten century deep into the dark corridors of the palace. From that night on, my reality split into two. During the daylight hours, I was exactly as I had always been. I wore my European suits, I went to the toll office, I stamped documents, and I drank my tea. In the bright, unforgiving light of the sun, the palace was just an old, ruined building. I would look at the marble walls and laugh at my own nocturnal fears. But the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, a strange, suffocating intoxication would take hold of me. As dusk fell, I felt an urgent need to return to the palace. I felt as though someone, or many someones, were waiting for me. I would sit in the grand bedroom, and the empty air around me would fill up with a silent, unseen chaos. I felt like an uninvited guest in a grand, spectral assembly. I could hear the rustle of heavy silk brushing against the floorboards. I could hear the soft clinking of silver anklets running down the corridors. Sometimes I would feel a sudden rush of cold air, as if a group of women had just brushed past me in the dark, whispering and giggling in a language I couldn't quite understand, perhaps Persian or ancient Arabic. I stopped caring about my job. I stopped talking to the locals. I grew pale and thin, living entirely on coffee and the nervous energy of the night. I was falling in love with phantoms. I would spend hours wandering the dark, echoing halls, desperately trying to catch a glimpse of a jeweled veil or the flash of a dark eye. The only living soul who ever came near the palace was an old madman named Meher Ali. Every morning, just as the sun rose and the ghosts of the palace faded away, Meher Ali would wander near the iron gates. He was a terrifying sight, emaciated, wrapped in filthy rags, his eyes wide and unblinking. Every morning, without fail, he would scream at the top of his lungs, his voice raw and broken. Tafao, Tafao, sab jhoot hai. Keep away, it is all false. I used to find him annoying, but as the nights grew darker and the grip of the palace grew tighter around my mind, his words began to terrify me. I learned from my clerk that Meher Ali hadn't always been mad. He had once been a healthy, rational man, and he had once lived in the marble palace just like me. The hungry stones had devoured his sanity. He had looked too closely at the illusion, and it had broken his mind. Now he roamed the edges of the property, a living warning to anyone foolish enough to stay. But I couldn't leave. The stones had their hooks in me. The illusion became completely physical on a night of a terrible, violent storm. The wind shrieked through the arches, and rain battered the marble walls. The palace felt more crowded, more frantic than ever before. I was lying in the dark, my heart racing, listening to the cacophony of the storm outside and the whispering voices inside. Suddenly, the bed sank. I froze. A weight had dropped onto the mattress beside me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. I could hear someone sobbing. It was the sound of such desperate, agonizing heartbreak that my own chest ached in response. It was the weeping of a woman, mourning a lost life, a lost love, trapped in an eternity of stone. I reached out in the darkness, my hands grasping frantically at the empty air. There was no one there, but the sobbing continued, right next to my ear. I couldn't take it anymore. I leaped from the bed and ran out into the corridor. The darkness was absolute. I was running blindly, chasing the sound of a woman screaming my name, begging me to save her. Then, a massive crack of lightning illuminated the hallway. For a fraction of a second, I didn't see an empty, crumbling corridor. I saw the palace in its terrifying prime. I saw massive crystal chandeliers ablaze with light. I saw eunuchs with drawn, curved swords guarding heavy mahogany doors. I saw women in sheer, jeweled veils weeping in the corners. I saw dark blood staining the pristine white marble floor. The lightning faded. The darkness snapped back. I didn't stop to pack my bags. I didn't take my money, my clothes, or my ledgers. I ran blindly out of the grand doors, down the steps, and into the pouring rain. I ran past the iron gates, slipping in the mud, until I heard the madman, Meher Ali, screaming from the woods in the pitch black, keep away, it's all false." The next morning, I stood shivering in the government office in the town, still wearing my soaked night clothes, and demanded an immediate transfer. I never set foot on that property again. The stranger fell silent. The waiting room at the station was completely still. The hum of the ceiling fan seemed unusually loud. My kinsman, the steadfast rationalist, opened his mouth. I knew he was about to ask a question, to demand a scientific explanation for the scent of the ether, or to point out to a psychological flaw in the man's state of mind. But before he could utter a single word, the shrill, deafening whistle of the train pierced the night air. The Calcutta Express pulled into the junction with a roar of steam and grinding iron. In the sudden chaos of porters shouting and passengers gathering their luggage, the stranger stood up. He picked up his walking stick and tipped his hat to us. "My carriage is this way, gentlemen," he said quietly. He stepped out into the fog of the platform and disappeared into the crowd, leaving us standing there, wondering how much of the past is truly dead and how much of it is simply waiting for the right person to come along.